All right, folks, welcome back. My name is Dave. This is the Radical Independent. Thanks for being here. We got really the show's favorite guest. People love to hear from Scott Ritter. He really needs no introduction. You know him, though, from his recent book, which I can show here, Scott. For those of you who haven't purchased a copy of it, you probably should. You can see it behind Scott, and it's available everywhere where you buy quality books and even not so good books, I guess. We welcome back Scott Ritter. How are you, Scott?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. I want to talk first and foremost about the tanks, right? The tanks are in the news. Germany's sending tanks. The US is now sending tanks, responding to Germany. Portugal, I think, has signed on to send tanks from what I've heard. I'm not 100% on that. Maybe you have a little bit more information on Portugal sending tanks. The media, Scott, is obviously making this into something that logistically is going to be really difficult. First of all, and I've watched you and I've been checking in on some of the other commentators out there, and it's pretty universally accepted that the tanks are difficult to maintain. You just don't send tanks somewhere and expect the people who don't know how to run or use these tanks to be able to operate them. So to kind of jump a few steps ahead, Scott, are we going to be sending, is NATO going to be officially sending in, like, will the United States be sending in people who know how to, use these tanks and essentially declare, hey, this is a war? We heard from Germany the other day that they said we're at war with Russia. The United States has stopped short from saying that, but we're behaving like we're at war with Russia. And another question, and I'll let you just answer these. Isn't Congress supposed to get involved if we're going to get this deep into this? Doesn't there need to be some kind of a declaration, or are we operating off of some other previously declared, like we did the war on terror, and that's like an open-ended, are we going to like transfer that declaration over to Russia because we believe they're a terrorist country? So your thoughts, or what do you think?
Well, I mean, first of all, the German foreign minister's unfortunate statement made before the European parliamentary body that Germany was at war with Russia was immediately debunked and refuted by the German foreign ministry. So her own ministry said, you're wrong. But she's touching on a sensitive topic because while no formal declaration of war has been made, and nor will one be made between NATO and Russia, because that's just one step before the end of the world. The fact is, Ukraine is serving as a de facto proxy of NATO for the purpose of engaging the Russian military in combat. The Ukrainian defense minister has said this straight up, that they are a proxy. They're dying, and NATO needs to provide them the equipment to continue this fight. Legally speaking, for NATO to act on that makes NATO a party to the conflict. So legally speaking, every piece of NATO infrastructure that touches a piece of equipment that's designated for transit to Ukraine is a legitimate target of war. Russia is not going to, of course, strike NATO territory, because that would invoke Article 5, and that would be the end of the world. But the fact is, NATO is brushing up very close to a red line that could cause it to lurch over and get directly involved in direct combat operations against Russia. These tanks, no, there won't be any official NATO boots on the ground, meaning that no American soldiers designated as such, no German soldiers designated as such, no NATO troops designated as such are going to accompany these tanks into Ukraine. And that's why these are literal death traps for the Ukrainians. It takes 22 weeks to train a U.S. soldier on how to operate the M1, and that's just basic basic understanding. After that time, I always tell people in the Marine Corps, it takes a long time to train a Marine, but to make a Marine combat capable takes even longer. That Marine has to be incorporated into an existing unit that's fully conversant in the tactics and doctrine and maintenance and everything associated with war. That unit has existed for some time, is full of veterans who have been in for 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And this newly trained person joins this existing unit, and then and only then can they be, truly effective in combat. If you have an entire unit of people who have just been trained, they have no combat capability whatsoever, and they will all die, especially when going up against an army like the Russians, who are veterans, are savvy, have the equipment. So these tanks are going to be deployed piecemeal with crews insufficient to the task. The good news for some of these crews is that these tanks, which are all maintenance nightmares, many of them will break down before they make it to the front line, meaning that crew will have to evacuate the tank and hopefully get that tank evacuated, for their sake, get that tank evacuated back out of Ukraine to Poland, Germany, and elsewhere, where they will be maintained and brought back. For those who are unfortunate enough to have a fully functioning tank and they get to the forward edge of the battle area, they will die. Sooner rather than later, their tanks will become high priority targets for the Russians, who have spent the last decade and a half not only training to fight NATO tanks while NATO was with the United States in the Middle East and Central Asia chasing insurgents. Russia was singularly focused on the job of closing with and destroying NATO forces in large-scale ground combat, but they're also equipped with weaponry that is specifically designed to defeat the most advanced NATO tanks out there. So anybody who thinks that these tanks are going to show up and the Russians are going to pee their pants and run have another thing coming. The Russians aren't happy about this because it is an escalation, but the Russians aren't panicking. They will simply turn these NATO tanks into the death traps that they are. We keep talking about a NATO proxy army, and it functioned as a NATO proxy army. And when you take equipment that the Ukrainians are conversant in, like T-72 tanks and things of this nature, they can adapt that to NATO doctrine, NATO operations, so they perform in a NATO-like manner on the battlefield. But when you take the Ukrainians and you give them equipment that they can't use, all the tactics and all the operations training in the world goes out the window because the equipment just isn't doing the job. So that's the fact. All of these tanks that are coming in are not going to have the level of combat proficiency that people are anticipating. Moreover, they're being staggered in. It's not as though all these tanks are going to show up at the same time and Ukrainians will be able to bring this armored fist and hit the Russians. The tanks are going to be staggered in, 14 here, 12 there, which means they're going to be committed piecemeal into the battle. And again, the ones that don't break down and make it to the battlefield will be destroyed in piecemeal fashion. This is simply, to be honest, weakening Ukraine. It's not strengthening Ukraine. This is actually making Ukraine weaker because Ukraine is going to be operating with heightened levels of expectation, that they think they will be capable of doing something that they aren't capable of doing. And if they try to do that, they're going to pay the ultimate price, which will be the literal slaughter of Ukrainian troops, the continued slaughter of Ukrainian troops on the battlefield. Russia's ready, and Russia has the solution. And unfortunately, that solution translates into destroyed tanks and dead Ukrainian soldiers.
Yeah. Scott, what did this accomplish then? Is this just like a PR stunt? Like, hey, we're big and tough and strong, and we're going to send tanks over, and people are buying stock in various military hardware companies here in the United States, and who knows, maybe around the world. I'm not sure, but what purpose does this? I mean, you made it pretty clear that this is going to be very bad news for Ukraine if this actually happens.
Well, we go back to General Zaluzhny, who is the commander of Ukrainian armed forces, interview that he gave to The Economist last year, and he basically said that if he isn't given 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, 500 artillery pieces, he can't win the conflict. He made that straight up. If you don't give me this, we're going to lose. Mm-hmm. Well, he didn't get it. I mean, that's the fact. He asked for 300 tanks, even with all these tanks that people are talking about sending in staggered manner. If they all worked, he's getting around 140 of them. That's less than 50% of what he asked for. Same thing with the infantry fighting vehicles, less than 50%. Artillery, less than 10% of what he asked for. So NATO has not stepped up to the plate. And NATO knows this. Zelensky knows this. In fact, Zelensky, I think today just tweeted out that if he doesn't, or said that if he doesn't get the Abrams tanks, if they arrive in August, it's too late. What do you mean too late, Zelensky? You mean you're going to lose the war? You mean you know what's about to happen to you? You understand what Russia's getting ready to do? You know that the Russians are already stressing the totality of the frontage with offenses that are working, and you have no reserves left, and you're committing what little reserves you have, and you're opening up additional gaps that the Russians are going to come in with 300,000 troops and slaughter your troops, wipe them off the face of the map. You know that's about to happen to you, right, Zelensky? Which is why you're saying if these tanks come in August, it's too late, because you'll be done by August. Zelensky knows this. Zelensky knows this. And everybody in NATO knows this. What the Ramstein Contact Group has done is provide political cover for the politicians who claim they support Ukraine, but are willing, as Lindsey Graham said, to fight to the last Ukrainian. And that's getting ready to happen. Look at the madness that is the Ukrainian mobilization right now. I mean, when Russia mobilized, 200,000 cowards ran away. But, Russia didn't hunt them down. In fact, Russia opened the doors and said, please leave. We don't want you. Get out of here. Right. And then 300,000 real men stepped up to the plate, and they're being trained, and they're showing up on the battlefield, and they understand the mission that they have to accomplish. The Ukrainians are tired of this war. They don't want to fight anymore. And the men that are out there who are supposed to show up for mobilization aren't. And so here's the ultimate insult. People see these videos of these Ukrainian mobilizers wearing uniforms with guns, running around like real men, kicking down doors and kidnapping people. What they don't know is those guys are the biggest cowards in the world. They have bought their position. See, to become one of these guys that run around and terrorize people, you have to pay $20,000 to $30,000 for that privilege, because otherwise you'd be sent to the front lines. So basically, these are the sons of the rich people who can't get out of the country. So they pay off the mobilization board. They say, I'll be one of the enforcers. Here's $20,000 to $30,000. And they're all running around playing tough guy. Newsflash, you cowardly pieces of manure. When you don't get enough men torn from their families, hunted down in the streets, the government's going to turn on you, and eventually going to gather all you up into a battalion and send you to a place like Bakhmut, and you're all going to die. And I say this with a smile on my face, because you deserve to die. You paid $30,000 for the privilege of tearing people away from their families, to send them off without training to get slaughtered on the front line. The only punishment you deserve is the bullet that the Russians are going to put not in the back of your head, but somewhere in the front of your body, because Russians don't shoot you in the back unless you're retreating, and then they give you a chance to run away. No, you're going to stand there peeing your pants while some Russian soldier slaughters you, and that is a fate you deserve. I don't mean to be too mean here, but my God, I can't think of anything more cowardly than to buy your weight out of your national duty to serve, to run around and grab people who don't want to have anything to do with this war, and then claim that you're somehow a hero, a big man, a tough guy. You're not. The Ukrainian mobilization is going terribly. So, even when they get this equipment, the people that are going to be manning this equipment may not be so interested in taking it aggressively towards the Russians. I think a lot of these guys are probably looking for the first opportunity to get out of that tank, wave the white flag, and surrender. And you already see that. People are starting to surrender more and more on the front lines. The Russians are starting to process prisoners as the awful reality about what's about to happen to the Ukrainians is sinking in to those Ukrainians on the front lines.
Yeah. Are you surprised at how, for lack of a better word, stupid Germany is behaving in this, with their citizens, chopping wood this winter to try to stay warm, and their economy is in shambles. And it boggles my mind. It's bad here in the United States, no question. But from what I'm reading, it's
just a second. My dog is reaching into my research box and chewing up primary research materials.
Well, we can't have that happening. But maybe this is just a little time out here we could take for the dog.
I have to save my book in progress, and he was chewing it up.
Well, this is live television, folks.
Live TV, baby.
And it's not corporate media, you know that for sure. This high budget set that I've gotten, basically looks like you've turned your office into a studio there. But getting back to Germany, I mean, it just boggles my mind. I mean, yeah, we'll send in some tanks, and even like you say, it's kind of a useless gesture because of what's going to happen. But I mean, the German people, are getting this news and saying, okay, I can't find food, can't heat my house, but we're going to send tanks. It's kind of like people here. I always use the natural disaster that happened nearby. Then you got people in California, you got people all over the place, Scott, who are wondering, why are we so dedicated? I mean, I guess this is the bigger existential question. Why? It's because this is the end of NATO, right? This is it. It's done. That the new world order that they want is not going to happen, and they can see it slipping away. Is that where this is?
Well, it's worse than that. Look, in the United States, we can explain this away by just saying Russophobia. I mean, I think tomorrow is the anniversary, or this weekend is the anniversary, the 20th anniversary of George Bush's State of the Union address in 2003 that pretty much staked out the case for war. And it's a tough time for me because I spent a lot of time trying to prevent this war by putting truth out there to watch the president get up and lie to the American public. But what was even more difficult was the American public's willingness to accept that lie at face value, because they had been pre-programmed for decades to believe that Saddam Hussein was the personification of evil and Iraq was evil, all that stuff. Well, the same thing is happening in this country regarding Russia. The American people have been pre-programmed into accepting it without question at face value, the notion that Vladimir Putin is evil, and that Russia is a nation of, automatons, robots who simply nod their head and are suppressed by this brutal dictator. And so we don't question. I mean, there's people like you and I who do question, but there's a lot of people who don't. It's not something that I give Americans a pass on, but I understand it. I understand how it happens. I don't understand it for Germany, and I'll tell you why. You know what today is? Today is Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Yeah.
Okay. Today is the day that literally embodies the concept of never again. Now, never again isn't just in the minds of for the German people. Never again isn't just about never again shall the Holocaust occur. It's gone deeper than that. Germany. Never again means never again will we allow ourselves to embrace militaristic policies that have German military equipment and troops being used in support of odious ideologies and odious objectives. The Germans aren't supposed to be building armies that go overseas and fight foreign wars. Never again means never again, literally never again. And the Germans have forgotten this, and I don't know how they can, because they are literally the grandchildren of Nazis, all of them, every single one of them. Every single German out there. There were very few good Germans. I don't want to hear this stuff. They were good Germans. No, there weren't. They were silent. To be silent in the face of evil doesn't make you good. It makes you a god darn coward. And that is the collective German nation, a bunch of cowards, despicable punks who have forgotten their history. You are sending German tanks to fight Russians on Ukrainian soil that do not learn anything. Not anything. These people disgust me. And it's, they're not supposed to. They acknowledge in their own laws that German weapons are not supposed to be sent abroad. German weapons are for the defense of the homeland, not to be sold abroad, because that becomes an extension of militaristic policy. But they're doing it. And they're not just doing it because they're being pressured by the United States. Angela Merkel has acknowledged she lied about Minsk, creating the conditions for this conflict. She lied to have a war with Russia. That's literally what she did. She lied to have a war with Russia. And now Scholz is sending German tanks to Ukraine to go to war with Russia. Never again. Oh, it's happening again, Germany. It's happening again. I think you all should get on your knees and pray that Russia doesn't seek to update the war memorial that's next door to the Bundestag in Berlin, in Tiergarten. You know, the one with the two T-34 tanks that's up there, staring down the Germans, reminding them, hopefully, every second of their pathetic little lives. Once they stood for evil, and that evil was defeated by a Soviet military that drove into Berlin, slaughtering Nazis. And maybe it's time for Russia to drive back in Berlin and remind them what never again means, what it really means. Because it should mean never again. But if Germany keeps doing this, it's going to happen again. And it should happen again. I have no sympathy for the German people, none whatsoever. They're pathetic little slugs who have forgotten their history. And when you have a history like Nazi Germany, you can't forget it. It can't be inconvenient for you. No, 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 no. You guys are lucky to be a nation state today. You know, there was a plan at the end of World War II. One of the advisors of Franklin Roosevelt was promulgating it that basically said, let's deindustrialize Germany and turn it into a little place where the only thing the Germans could do is grow crops. That's it. You'll become sort of the breadbasket of Germany, but you'll never again be able to build an industry. Why? Because they didn't trust the Germans not to succumb to the temptation of militaristic power. And that's what's happening today. Germany has succumbed to that temptation. They're sending German tanks to kill Russians on Ukrainian soil. Hey guys, John Erickson wrote a book, The Road to Berlin. I'd advise every German to read it and understand why this is a bad idea.
Yeah. Well said, Scott. You know, what I've noticed is that, you know, you've talked about Stepan Bandera on this show and other shows, and what he was all about. And what was it? The KGB took him out, right? Like in the late 50s, early 60s.
1959. Yeah.
Yeah. And but I've read some kind of revised history, you know, articles that say, you know, villain or terrorist, you know, good guy or bad guy. And just, you know, and they still admit, you know, hey, you know, this guy was, you know, a real bad dude, but there are a lot of people in certain parts of Ukraine who look up to him. He's a hero and this and that. And I just shake my head. It's like, if the guy was a terrorist and he needed to be killed, and that's a good thing, right? But we cannot see what's happened, I think, in the last, I don't know, 20 or 30 years or so, is that reality is always in question. I mean, maybe it's because everybody's got a conspiracy theory about whatever happened, you know, 9/11 or JFK and so forth. But of course, we kind of learned that JFK conspiracy theory appears to be bearing out as 100% correct. But in the case of Bandera, I mean, this is evil personified, isn't it?
No, he is. I mean, look, I have some very good friends who will continue to be very good friends. I mean, I'm me and they are working overtime to ensure that our differences on Ukraine do not cause a lifetime friendship to split up. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about this issue, I keep my emotions down, they keep their emotions down, and we speak very calmly. And they have said that, you know, from the Ukrainian standpoint, Bandera is a nationalist who had to do some very bad things in defense of nationalism. They say that the uniqueness of Ukraine's history, you know, caught between the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Poles, the Russians, the Germans, that it was inevitably to promote Ukrainian nationalism. And when I'm talking about specifically Western Ukrainian nationalism, you had to embrace violence. This is why Stepan Bandera, when he was on trial in 1936, I believe, in Poland for murder, when he said, to support my ideology, I will have to kill 1 million people. And people are saying, yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's right. That's about right. That's about right. 1 million people need to die for this because of the difficulties. So they're trying to explain things away. Mm-hmm. The problem is, let's look at the United States, and I'm about ready to piss off everybody in the South. Pick any Southern state, anyone that fought in the Confederacy, and tell me that you're defending state rights by endorsing the odious ideology of a slave owner who joined the Ku Klux Klan, who believes it's a good idea to ride people down in the middle of the night, burn crosses, lynch black people, intimidate white people who are standing up for human rights. And they say, well, all that's justified because they're simply trying to stand up for states' rights. Oh, no. They're not trying to stand up for state rights. They are racists, murderers, thugs, vile characters who should be condemned, not only to death while they're alive, but be condemned in their memory so that whenever somebody hears their name, they convulse in revulsion because there's nothing good about these people. It's not about state rights. So please don't tell me that Stepan Bandera is about Ukrainian nationalism. It's not. If Ukraine wants to define its vision of nationalism in the person of a man who promotes mass murder, then Ukrainian nationalism doesn't deserve to exist at all. It should be eradicated. So if that's what the scholars, the supporters of Ukraine are saying, please don't focus on the bad things about Stepan Bandera, only focus on the good. There's nothing good to focus on, literally nothing good to focus on. So it's misplaced. This is one of these revisionist arguments that are put out by people who don't have the courage to confront the awful reality of this odious man. And instead, for political reasons, because of the Russophobia, because that's the only reason why you could even engage in this sort of debate and discussion to revise the memory of Stepan Bandera. It's not because you care about the Ukrainians, because no one could care about Ukraine if you're using Stepan Bandera as the poster child. It's that you hate Russia so much that you're willing to go blind on the crimes this man committed in order to put together a plan to oppose Russia. And that's the sickness. That's the sickness of it. For all the people that are out there trying to revise the history of Stepan Bandera, they're guilty of grossly oversimplifying the reality of Vladimir Putin. And I would love to have a debate with anybody on both topics side by side. First, I'll crush you in your defense of Bandera, and then I'll destroy you over your ignorance of Vladimir Putin. But they don't want to have that debate. They would prefer to sit there and play, distraction games about Bandera and continue to, promulgate their ignorance about Putin to promote a policy of what? Russophobia, the fear of Russia, the hatred of Russia. And it would be one thing, for instance, I know why I hate Stepan Bandera. Mm-hmm. I know why I hate the Banderist movement. And I can tell you why, I can articulate why, and it will be factually accurate and it will be in the proper context. None of the people that hate Vladimir Putin can say why they hate Vladimir Putin. They don't know why. There are no facts. They say he's a dictator. He's not a dictator. Where's your facts about it? They say he does this. He doesn't do that. Where's your facts? They have no facts. All they have is an idea that's been planted in their head by Americans who fear the fact that Putin, in the post-Yeltsin period of the 1990s, said, I'm not going to allow Russia to be dismembered. I'm not going to allow Russia to be trampled upon. I'm not going to allow Russia to be economically raped, politically controlled. I'm going to have Russia stand up its own 2 feet. And that's the sin that Vladimir Putin is guilty of. That's his greatest sin, that he refuses to yield to the West, and he insists on having Russia stand on its own 2 feet and be recognized as a nation that is deserving of its status in the world based upon the reality of that nation. That's his biggest crime. America can't forgive him for being a good Russian.
Yeah. Well, again, well said, Scott. What I've noticed in the media, though, with all of these distractions, you get a headline like the tank thing just went on and on for days, and it's still probably going on out there. I don't hear a whole lot about what's happening on the ground right now in Ukraine, and my guess would be is because things aren't going well on the ground. Do you know anything specifically about the infrastructure, about territorial advances from one side or the other? You always hear in the media, by the way, when there's a Ukrainian victory, it'll take 2 or 3 days worth of news coverage, but I never hear anything about Russian advancement and how they're doing. What do you know about what's going on the ground right now?
I mean, what I know is I just have to say that I'm thousands of miles removed.
Right.
I review information from sources, some of whom are on the ground, some of whom aren't, all of whom have a bias. So I can't say I know. What I can say is that the information that I'm receiving that I have assessed allows me to believe that first of all, the Russian air campaign is being extraordinarily successful on two levels. First level is the destruction of the Ukrainian energy infrastructure, and this will continue. Just yesterday, more critical nodes of energy production were destroyed. Ukraine is going darker and darker and darker. Two, that the Russian air campaign is also focused on neutering the Ukrainian air defense system. A lot of effort's been put in by NATO and the West to help Ukraine rebuild its anti-air defenses, and the Russians are dismantling it piece by piece by piece by piece. This isn't going to happen overnight. It's part of an ongoing conflict. Remember, when the West is providing Ukraine with billions of dollars of air defense system, and that's being employed with the total support of NATO in terms of where to place it, how to integrate the radars and all this stuff, it's a tough problem. But the Russians are rapidly solving that problem, and they're destroying the Ukrainian air defenses at a greater rate than it can be replenished by the West. And this will lead to an eventual moment where the culmination of the Russian effort will make Ukraine totally defenseless. And at that point in time, Russia is going to double, triple, quadruple down on its current pace of operations, and they're just going to shut Ukraine down as a modern nation state. That's on the air side. This is happening. Everybody knows it's happening. There's frustration throughout the West that the air defense isn't working, that there's nothing they can do to stop this. It scares everybody. This is why there's a growing recognition that this war's over, literally over, because that alone, the destruction of the Ukrainian nation state that is occurring and will eventually occur, is a war-winning strategy all by itself. But then the Russians are combining that with because that war-winning strategy, the collapse of the Ukrainian nation, brings about denazification, because it's going to be the end of Zelensky, and eventually Russia is going to put a government in place that meets its requirements of constitutional changes that eliminate the ideology of Stepan Bandera from every aspect of Ukrainian society. That's denazification. That's what the air campaign is designed to achieve. Demilitarization, which is the other thing, is the destruction of the Ukrainian armed forces. And we've already seen that the Ukrainians today have somewhere between 200, 300,000 troops left in uniform. This is down from the 700 to 900,000 they had when the war began, and through successive mobilizations. They've lost pretty much everything. These troops now, remember when we talked before about what had happened to the Russians when they overextended their lines with only 200,000 troops, and how it was very difficult to talk about defending a 1,000-kilometer front with 200,000 troops, because even if you put all the troops up line, that's 200 troops per kilometer. But the reality is the troops are spread everywhere, and so the Ukrainians are probably down to 50 men per kilometer of frontage. Now, some of that frontage is on water, so they can, where that someone's in Kherson, they can bleed that away. They're concentrating a whole lot of effort in Bakhmut, where up to 14 brigades. And remember, a brigade is around 5,000 troops. So you do the math.
Mm-hmm.
It's around 90,000 troops have been chewed up by the Russians in Bakhmut alone. Yeah. But the Russians now are launching offensives in the Zaporizhia area south of Bakhmut that are having tremendous success. Again, these aren't rapid advances like we're used to, big arrows. These are, 5-7 kilometers a day, driving through, putting pressure on the Ukrainians, compelling the Ukrainians to divert reinforcements there from other parts in the front. And as soon as the Ukrainians do that, so Bakhmut is this meat grinder. They're putting everything in there. The Russians are just grinding that up. Meanwhile, the Russians open up a front in Zaporizhia. Ukrainians take troops that they're supposed to send to Bakhmut, and they have to divert them down here to Zaporizhia to stabilize that front, but it's not enough. But meanwhile, as soon as they commit those troops, the Russians open up at Uladar, north of Bakhmut, and then they open it up at other places. And basically, now the Ukrainians have to divert whatever they got over there. Remember all these tanks that are coming in with the 20,000 troops? Trust me, they're not going to come in like this. They're going to come in like this. Boom, send them straight to the front. And when they show up at the front, it's going to be insufficient. The Russians are going to grind that up. Boom, next company comes in, send them to the front. They're all going to die. So the whole force that Zelensky says I need to launch this 84-kilometer advance to Melitopol, it will never happen because A, he doesn't have enough, but when it comes in, it's just going to go and get dissipated along the front. And remember, the Russians are doing this without committing their major armored fist. At some point in time, the Russians are going to monitor this battlefield, and they're going to play this game of advancing on a broad front, compelling the Ukrainians to chew up their reserves till they have nothing. And there's going to be giant gaps in Ukrainian lines with nothing in the back to back them up. And then the Russians are going to pop right through and go in whatever direction they choose. I'm not on the Russian general staff. I have ideas what I would do if I were, but it's irrelevant. They know what they're doing. They know what they want to accomplish. And they're basically, this is called shaping the battlefield, prepping the battlefield. They're making the battlefield work to their advantage. And it's happening right now as we speak. The West doesn't want to acknowledge it because to acknowledge it means you understand the futility of everything we're doing, the futility of providing them tanks, the futility of providing them air defense. It's an absolute abysmal waste of money, equipment, but more importantly, manpower. Mm-hmm. We claim we care about the Ukrainians, and yet we're setting them up to lose literally another 100, 150,000 men in combat, because by the time this thing is done, that's the number of troops Ukraine is going to lose. The Russians aren't playing special military operation anymore. They're playing war. In the interim between the Ukrainian offensive in September that recaptured Kharkov and took Kherson, the right bank, the Russians have not only stabilized their lines, but they have reorganized. Gone is the old post-Cold War concept of the battalion tactical group. I mean, that was a concept the Russians came up with when they weren't considering large-scale ground combat in Europe. But the Russians now understand what they're up against, the collective West and NATO proxy army. And so they have reorganized their forces back to old Cold War era type things, where you're talking about, regiments, divisions, armies, and that's coming in, and NATO's got nothing to stop it, meaning the NATO proxy in Ukraine. So that's what's happening. Is it going to be easy? Nope. I mean, the point I've always made is, Ukrainians die hard. Even people who don't want to be on the front line, they don't want to die. And not all of them are going to surrender. The ones that are there are going to put up a fight. Try. I don't encourage this, but I mean, anybody who's been in a life and death hand-to-hand combat situation, how hard it is to kill a person that knows they're about to die and does everything in their power to stop that from happening. You get animal strength. You just do things. You scream, you bite, you gouge, you do whatever it takes to stay alive. That's the reality of what's happening on the battlefield. The Ukrainians are fighting, screaming, gouging, kicking to stay alive. And it's going to be a very difficult fight for the Russians, a very difficult fight, but they'll win.
Yeah. Timetable, Scott, are we still thinking this year sometime, or is this?
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, Zelensky said it.
Yeah.
If the Abrams tanks aren't here by August, it's over. Yeah. It's over. He's right. He's correct. When you take a look at the military math, remember, the CIA, who I would imagine has not just some good intelligence, but, hopefully sound analysis of a non-political nature. is able to look things over, and they know that the Russians aren't going for the dramatic win anymore. That's the Russians have a plan, which is a broad scale attack, grinding them down. Just what I already described to you. The CIA knows this. Right. They've gone to Zelensky, they've gone to Zelensky, and they've briefed them and said, "This is what's happening." And now the question is, how can the West help Ukraine come up with a strategy to counter that? And it's like looking at the map and going, imagine, you ever play Risk?
I used to a long time ago.
Yeah. Okay, but near the end of the game, there comes a point when you're losing that you look at the map and you're going, they got a big stack of things here, big stack of things there, big stack of thing here, and I've got this. And when I look at my reinforcements coming in, I got 15. And unless I have magical rolls of the dice where I just come up with sixes the whole time, and they come up with snake eyes the whole time, this game's over. And that's what basically Zelensky's looking at the risk board going, we're done. There's nothing, unless you magically give me more resources that I can put out there, it's done. And there is no magic. The resources aren't going to show up. Yeah. And so that's why Zelensky said, if I don't have the Abrams tanks by August, it's over, because it's over.
All right. Well, I guess Zelensky answered the question then. That was good, Scott. I like the way you wrapped that up. All right. So I know you're a busy man, so we're going to let you go. I've seen you on a whole bunch of shows. Are you going to be doing anything in person? I know it sounds like you have a book in the works there too, huh?
Well, that's just another. I'm writing a book about scud hunting during the Gulf War. That's something that I was intimately involved in both during the war and as a UN weapons inspector. So I'm trying to capture that history, and so that requires me to wade through archives and books and everything. But I'm about 80% through with that. But I'm still focused on this book, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. I mean, I'll mention it here. Yeah. The book's getting translated into Russian, and we hope to get a Russian publisher. And when that happens, I'm going to go to Russia and do a book tour, and I'm going to bring a documentary film crew to capture that experience, capture the interaction between me and the Russians, capture how the Russians feel about this, about disarmament, about working, talking with an American about this, building a bridge. And then I'm going to come back and make a documentary film. And then I'm going to travel the United States and show American people this film and show them the truth about what's going on inside Russia, how the Russians feel about Americans, how the Russians want to live in peace and harmony with the Americans, and how the Russians view the importance of disarmament. And maybe we can begin to build a grassroots movement. And my ultimate dream here through this, and it might just be a dream, but a lot of people have forgotten what happened in June of 1982. We put 1 million people, not we, but America put 1 million people in Central Park protesting not against something, but in support of disarmament. Mm-hmm. That's what we need again. We need 1 million people in New York City, in Washington, D.C., in San Francisco, throughout this country. We need millions of people to come out and say to the government, we want peace with Russia. We want nuclear disarmament. We want arms control. And it would be really cool is at the same time the American people came out, millions of Russians went to the street, not in protest against their government, but in support of the Americans. And millions of people got in the streets in Europe and did the same thing, supporting the Americans, sending a signal to the American government that you must not turn your back on nuclear disarmament, because if you do so, it means the end of the world. So that's sort of what I'm up to right now.
Well, Scott, you have a lot of ambition there, and I don't know what happened to the peace movement in this country. It's kind of morphed into something different now, where you've got people across different parties. Before it was more of kind of a left-leaning idea, but now I think the people who really care about this understand that there are economic consequences, there are spiritual undertones. There are all kinds of things going on with could be the war of all wars, really. I mean, if we go forward and do some of these things that these politicians want to do, it's going to end very badly. So I appreciate what you're doing out there. You're one of the few voices, Scott, and I appreciate you coming on my little show here.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right.